Let's take a look at a real life example. So on this next example, we have two ships are leaving a harbor together, traveling on courses that have an angle of 135 degrees and 40 minutes between them. Let's stop there. So first of all, we have a harbor. So let's go ahead and draw our harbor. I'm going to put it over here so I've got enough room. So I've got our harbor. And we have two ships that are leaving the harbor together. And so they're going to create an angle, though, as they go out of 135 degrees and 40 minutes between them. So let's put that angle in between them, the 135 degrees and 40 minutes. And let's see. So far, so good. If each travels 402 miles, how far apart are they? So we've got each of this. So here's one ship over here. So here's ship one, and it has traveled 402 miles. And then on the other side, let's put ship two. And what they're telling us is that that one has also traveled 402 miles. And then what we're looking for is the distance between those two ships. And let's call that x. So this is a perfect example of the law of cosines. Why? Because we have two sides, 1, 2, and the angle in between, meaning the angle that does not match up with those two sides. And there is no guarantee that this is a right triangle, which is why we have to use the law of cosines when you have two sides and the angle in between that does not match up with either of the sides. So we can label these sides whatever you want if it makes it easier. But I'm just going to write this as a squared equals b squared plus c squared minus 2bc cosine of, remember it should be angle A, whatever angle we have. So that means that we've got angle A, so I'm going to call that angle A here. That's the 135, which means that the side that we're looking for is the one that I'm calling X. So I'm going to go ahead and fill that in, is that instead of A, I'm actually using X on my picture, and that is squared according to the formula. And then it doesn't matter what I call the other two sides, so I'll call one of those B, and I'll call the other one C, but it doesn't really matter. And it really doesn't matter for this one because they're actually the same length, 402 miles for both B and C. Now let's go ahead and plug in B, which is 402, which is again squared, plus we can plug in C, which is also 402, which should also be squared, minus our 2, and again we've plugged in our B for the B squared. We need to plug in another B, minus 2B, which is again 402, times your C, and again we've already plugged in one C, so we can plug in the other one now, which is another 402, times cosine of our angle, which in this one is A, which we said is 135 degrees and 40 minutes. Now, the question is what happens? Well, we have to follow the order of operations starting out with, we'll leave the x squared alone, but we need to do all the exponents first. So we'll start out with doing the exponents, and the exponents tell us, well, 402 squared is 161,604. But then, plus, we have another 402 squared, which would be another 161,604, minus, then we also need to multiply out our 2 times our 402 times our 402 times our cosine of 135 degrees and 40 minutes. And depending on what kind of calculator you have and what you're doing at this point, you probably want to convert those minutes into degrees. So it'd be 135 well, you'd have to take the 40 minutes and convert it from minutes to degrees by dividing it by 60, which would give you 0.667 degrees. So you'd be actually doing cosine of 135.667 depending on how you round. So let's go ahead and see what happens when we multiply this to the 402 times the 402 times the cosine of the 135.667. Now what we get is actually rather large and negative. So we get a negative 231,000 187.5, and depending on how you round, 7. Be careful, that whole value is negative, but there's also another issue. There was already a negative out in front of it, so the two negatives together will actually turn into a plus or a positive. So now all I have to do is add up all my numbers. And let's see what happens when I add up all my numbers here. What we get when we add up everything is 554,000 and 395.57. This might be slightly off depending on how you rounded, but it should be pretty close. The next thing you should do is remember this is x squared, not x, so we need to get rid of the squared by taking the square root of both sides of the equation. So that will just get us x then, and so that will give us that x equals the square root of this thing, which gives us 744.6. And if we go back to the original problem, it says how far are they apart. My math lab would actually tell us how to round, but if we are asked to round this, would round to 745. And the question is, what are the units? Remember, the distance between the ships and the original harbor was in miles, so this will also be in miles, so this will be 745 miles. And if you rounded slightly differently, this might be a little bit off, but it should be very close. If somehow my math lab were to mark this wrong due to rounding, again, I would give your points back, but just try to wait to round as long as you can. One last formula. This last formula lets us find the